I remember thinking, I've lost my daughter.
Elle était catatonique, elle était en boule. Elle bougeait plus, elle mangeait plus, elle était plus autonome.
She started being conflictual with other people.
I never thought it was mental illness, and I don't know why.
My name is Joëlle Pouliot. I'm a journalist and a mental health advocate, and I also live with bipolar disorder. This is my story, but it could just as easily be about your child, partner, or best friend. When we talk about mental health, we tend to focus on how 1 in 5 Canadians suffer from issues like anxiety, or how depression rates have tripled in the past few years. But what's missing in the conversation is the role of caregivers in people getting better. As a journalist, I'd spent a decade telling other people's stories, and so when I was suffering with bipolar disorder for the first time, I started taking note in my journals of all the ups and downs to make sense of what I was going through. My brain feels like it's underwater. Everything feels like it's going too fast, yet I'm still able to have conversations with people. It's when I have to make decisions that I freeze completely. My journals captured how I experienced my illness, but I didn't know how it affected the people closest to me.
I remember thinking when Joëlle was growing up, she really can do anything she wants because she's really smart and she's got a lot of wherewithal. She's good with people. She's not shy and retiring. I really thought she had just the potential to do whatever she wanted.
À l'université, en journalisme, c'est une fille qui en mangeait, qui participait, puis qui s'impliquait beaucoup. Quand tout ça déboule comme proche, on a été pas mal secoués.
Studies have found that mental illness commonly surfaces in your mid-20s, when most people are shifting into adulthood. I was 27 when my first episode brought my world crashing down around me.
Et ma fille qui a toujours été capable de pondre des textes de façon rapide, magistrale, en français, en anglais, m'appelle. Elle est sortie de l'entrevue, white out, elle ne peut plus fonctionner.
She just changed. The life was sucked right out of her. She was confused. She was unable to function normally. It was scary. It was really an odd time for everybody.
The early days of any mental illness are chaotic. For me, dealing with bipolar disorder meant going through periods of crippling depression, followed by hyperactive mania filled with reckless behavior, excessive spending, and exaggerated self-confidence that alienated my closest friends, colleagues, and family. No one was prepared for it.
Many caregivers, many families face mental illness with zero knowledge. You know, mental illness is not a sexy topic. People don't necessarily inform themselves and educate themselves if it's not absolutely necessary.
I wanted to intervene. I didn't know how. I remember calling her out on the way she was acting and saying, "You need help," not knowing that in a manic episode, they just think we're wrong, we're in the wrong, everyone else is in the wrong.
I think everybody was in denial for a while until it became really clear that that this was bipolar disorder. And then, of course, once she was diagnosed, I Googled it.
Getting an official diagnosis of mental illness can take weeks, months, or even years. But even then, it's only the beginning. Those who suffer often go from adults who are capable to having moments where they need help with basic responsibilities. Cooking, staying active, paying bills. Your caregivers all play a critical role, but they're also directly impacted by your disease.
You know, it's very interesting because very often caregivers will manifest symptoms very similar to those of their loved ones. We are talking about anxiety, when we are talking about depression, it's very common for caregivers. So I think that it's first of all to recognize it, to accept it, and try to mitigate it.
I was exhausted all the time. I was definitely doing too much, but it just didn't seem right somehow. It's like, no, she's suffering way more than I am. So I have to do this. This is like my role.
Au début, on veut tout faire pour elle. Et c'est ça qui est tuant pour un proche aidant.
We went to some friends for dinner, and they knew Joëlle wasn't well, and so they said, "How's Joëlle?" I started crying. I couldn't stop crying. And one of my friends said, You have to get help. There's organizations. It's free. I mean, we live in Canada. We have a lot of options here for caregivers getting help. He immediately wrote down the name of some organizations, and that was it. The next day I called and I got an appointment.
I think that the difficulty of families is to accept that what they have hoped may have to be adjusted. And, it doesn't necessarily mean that, the person is not going to be able to accomplish and achieve a great deal of things, but it may be different than what they have hoped for.
I think the hardest thing to accept is that it's gonna always be like this. That's the hardest thing to accept. Just this sadness that she's not going to have the life that she wanted in so many ways.
C'est un immense deuil. C'est un immense deuil de papa.
Like all families dealing with mental illness, mine didn't choose to have their lives completely transformed. But they've stuck by my side, and that makes me one of the lucky ones. Whether you're a patient or an overwhelmed caregiver, you deserve to be recognized and supported.
Do we think we did a good job?
I think so.
I think we did a good job. Hey? I think we did a good job.
I hope that every caregiver will know that he is not alone, that there are so many people like him. Seeking help is likely to make his life easier and better.
Canada is one of the most multicultural countries in the world, but the unfortunate reality is that not everyone is treated equally, especially when it comes to mental health care. Throughout my recovery, I've met people from a wide range of cultures and backgrounds, but while we were on the same journey towards recovery, our paths were wildly different. I wanted to learn more about how people from different backgrounds than mine approach getting better in the healthcare system, as well as back home and in their communities.
Post-traumatic stress related to racism is a real thing. Like having constantly not only microaggressions, but macroaggressions, and then having to act like you're okay after.
Aisha Seavright is a program director with Black Mental Health Connections. Through her work, she's seen how much harder it is for people from Black communities with mental health issues to not only find support, but also understanding and empathy.
The denial of racism in Quebec is very huge. In our pilot support group, I was the facilitator, and one of the things that kept coming up was that people were very isolated growing up here, especially if they grew up in like predominantly white neighborhoods.
In my own lived experience, I've had situations where police officers have come to my house and put my family members in handcuffs, on the ground, but it was supposed to be a wellness check. That has planted a seed in my mind that I can't call police officers for a wellness check.
And I think that's like where a lot of people are within the Black community, is that you're not really allowed to have these conversations outside of your community. Otherwise, you're someone who's throwing the race card around. But literally, a Black person's life outside of the Black community is all about race. Everyone, no matter how they look at you, they're gonna treat you through this lens.
An important part of recovery for patients and caregivers is access to healthcare resources. Doctors, medication, and therapy all play a huge role in taking control of your mental health and caring for your loved one. But for caregivers and patients in many non-white communities, getting access to those resources can be a challenge.
In terms of the disparity of mental health resources and just access in general, it comes down to where do I go? Who do I trust?
One thing that like people in marginalized like BIPOC communities especially come across when seeking therapeutic care is that they have to explain their lived context to the therapist. So if it's someone who is maybe from Nigeria, they have to explain their culture, their upbringing, and the norms within their culture.
So mental health and mental illness is very complex, and it's very important that we take the time to understand the patient, to understand the family, the caregivers' concerns about what's going on, what they're observing, what they're seeing. Being more culturally competent will only help us better understand what they're going through.
Racism is a huge reason why a lot of Black people need support, but even within the community, there's a huge stigma against mental illness.
Speaking about mental health issues in my family is extremely taboo. In fact, like, we haven't really spoke about it. And I often even think to myself, like, it's not my story to tell.
It was only later in my recovery journey where I realized the true scope of my privilege. How the way I look, white skin, blue eyes, from a middle-class family, made it easier for me to get access to support and medical care that took my needs into consideration. But that same level of competent care isn't always available to people with different realities from mine.
Culturally competent care is just understanding that anyone who is passing in front of you could be living under multiple different intersections. So like race, gender, socioeconomic standing, religion. Culturally competent care is being intersectional and understanding how these different facets of someone's identity interacts with their lived experience and impacts their level of mental health.
From my experience, I think that there should be more cultural consultants possibly present at work, especially here in psychiatric settings, because often when we're doing an assessment with a patient, we realize that something's missing, and often we feel like we need to dig some more. And I usually get the feeling that there's something there around the cultural piece that we're not getting.
Healthcare has historically been catered towards white patients, and while culturally competent care is gaining popularity, it's often seen as a fringe service outside of the mainstream health system in Canada. Yet every patient, family, and caregiver can benefit from receiving care that is catered to their lived experiences and culture.
I think for people who are seeking support for their mental health, who might not know where to start looking online. Just literally Googling mental health with people of your intersection or people of your experiences to see things that might have come up that you aren't aware of, that you might be experiencing.
So I think it's very important to be mindful of the fact that, you know, people are going through something very difficult already, and we as healthcare providers and as a community need to be more understanding to make sure that we don't make things more difficult for people who are trying to access healthcare services and that are reaching out for help.
Mental illness is often called a selfish disease. As a patient, you sometimes need regular care and support from the people around you. But what happens when your needs start to hurt the caregivers who are putting their life on hold to help you get better? What comes to mind when you hear the word resilience? As caregivers and patients suffering from mental health issues, you've no doubt seen media posts and videos claiming that the secret to curing mental illness is just to be strong. Even during my own recovery, I was sometimes told that all I needed to be was more resilient. But in the real world, resilience is hard to build. On the way to resilience, there's a path filled with emotions, including resentment.
When you're dealing with someone who has bipolar disorder, it's easy to feel angry at them, at their behavior. Sometimes the behavior is really, really hard to deal with.
Elle m'a souvent mise en colère par rapport à des choses que je savais que c'était pas la bonne voie. Mais en même temps, il faut la traiter non pas comme un enfant, c'est une femme. C'est un adulte.
As a person dealing with mental illness, your expectations of your caregivers are often unattainable. Reading back through my journals from the early days of my illness, I realized the extra and sometimes unfair pressure I was putting on my own family. I feel so conflicted right now. I'm so angry and hurt by Mom and Dad. I know they care so much about me. I care so much about them, and I'm afraid of hurting them. How do you tell your parents that they're doing it all wrong?
So I think when we're looking at resources for caregivers, one of the things that struck me is that I think people have different needs at different times. For example, they've been in a caregiver role well before the person ever had their illness diagnosed. So I think at that particular point, there's issues of guilt, of frustration, maybe of despair. Really, that is a whole new phase for them.
The people that come into our support group, the first thing that they say is usually that they're not sure if they're supposed to be there. They're not sure if they do enough to be a caregiver. I see less anger or frustration, and it's really kind of that dam break moment for them where they're finally venting a little bit.
Resentment is like cancer for caregivers. It eats away at them from the inside until the damage is really hard to repair. The Canadian Psychology Association found that nearly 50% of caregivers report symptoms such as depression, hopelessness, and resentment. And that's just the ones who will admit to feeling that way.
With caregivers, there's a lot of guilt. Sometimes you feel guilty for being happy because the other person isn't. You feel guilty for laughing because the other person is depressed. You feel guilty for having a good time. It's a strange thing.
Mais oui, j'étais souvent en colère. J'étais contre la maladie. Le billet de loterie malchanceux.
Caregivers often fall into the trap of believing they need to put their own needs aside, they need to be resilient, and they need to care for their loved ones. But to be the best caregiver often means accepting care for yourself, something that experts agree is hard for most people.
I often explain it in a way where I say, you can only help them as much as you have a capacity for, and if you're burnt out, you're not going to be able to help.
I used to tongue-in-cheek use a quote from a book I read way back when I was in medical school, and it was survival rules for interns, and one of them was the first thing you do at a cardiac arrest is take your own pulse. And I put that in to say, wow, look, even doctors have to take care of themselves to be able to take care of somebody else.
So I've learned that I have limits and that I'm allowed, not just allowed these limits, but it's really important that I respect my own limits. I think there was a point for me where I had to tell myself that I have the right to be happy.
I think that's another challenge for people to be able to begin relating outside of the illness framework, and then gradually also working with the person to maybe responsibilize them.
So what is resilience? Resilience isn't burying your emotions when life gets hard. Resilience is the process of adapting to challenging life experiences. Ideally, with time, you and your loved ones develop a level of flexibility and understanding so that you can be there for each other, no matter what difficulties you face.
Doing too much is a really typical thing for caregivers. And you do it because you think it's the right thing to do, and it's easy to feel that the other person is not competent. They can't, or they're sick, or it's really important to let the adult with the illness deal with their lives, make their own mistakes, let them make decisions. Even though you think you could do it better, let them do it.
Money and mental health issues almost always coincide. During my first few manic phases, I spent tens of thousands of dollars, gained and lost numerous jobs, and I ended up on the verge of homelessness. But I wasn't the only one impacted by my financial troubles. For caregivers, supporting loved ones emotionally and financially can be one of the biggest challenges of someone getting better.
So certainly, money and money issues can be actually a very important factor in how somebody is doing with respect to their mental illness. And also sometimes we could almost say like a large area of conflict with caregivers.
There's a lot of grandiose thinking with mania, and so the spending is just hand in hand with that. It's bizarre.
Everyone deals with money stress, but for those suffering from mental health issues, money can be a major trigger. Whether it's the stress of being unable to work due to depression or anxiety, or with extreme spending during bipolar mania. Reading back through my journals, I can tell the moments where I was going into a manic phase.
I remember Joëlle spending thousands and thousands of dollars on clothes, but this is money that she didn't have, but she felt that she did have, thinking she will make tons of money in the future.
Non, c'est irrationnel. Comme tu contrôles pas, en fait. Moi, je me souviens, la première fois que j'ai été hospitalisé à Louis-H-Lafontaine, le premier médecin qui m'a vu m'a demandé si, en rentrant dans un magasin, j'achetais toutes les choses qui étaient vertes. C'est des fixations. Un été, j'ai acheté 300 plantes, là. Coup par coup, ça paraissait pas, mais à la fin de l'été, avec mon psychiatre, on est arrivé, puis on est terminé qu'il y avait un épisode d'hypomanie qui s'était manifesté, là.
Obsessions and grandiose thinking are clear signs of mania, but in the end, big ideas aren't enough to save you.
I think for caregivers, you can run into this situation where you want to make sure that the person's basics are covered, but it's almost like you no longer trust them with cash.
She went through all her money, and actually she sort of did that 2 rounds of that. And by the second time, the family understood, like, oh, okay, this is part of the disease, and it's just gonna keep going like this. The only way to stop this is for Joëlle to go through personal bankruptcy.
La réalité est que si on ne l'aide pas financièrement, ce serait beaucoup plus difficile encore. Puis c'est ça qu'il faut apprendre à jauger. Quand est-ce qu'elle a besoin d'aide, puis quand est-ce qu'elle dépense trop.
Mental illness makes it difficult to manage your money. You're asking someone who's already living with a low energy level, anxiety, or depression to be an ultimate budget shopper. But it also makes it difficult to have a career or make money.
When you're on leave of absence or on disability for any kind of mental issue, the thing is that you ask yourself, will anyone believe me? Because I don't have any cast, I don't have anything on me that shows that I have a disease. It's all inside my head.
La maladie bipolaire a eu beaucoup d'impact sur mes études et sur ma carrière, en fait sur mon non-existence de carrière. Depuis que j'ai 19 ans, je suis à l'université, puis là-dessus, j'ai plusieurs années là, qui étaient en arrêt là, pour maladie. Donc, j'ai accumulé énormément aussi d'études par rapport à ça.
One of the main reasons people won't go and seek help, mainly in the workplace, is because they are afraid of being judged. Even though there are services available, people won't go and seek help because they don't want their employers to know that they ask for help.
So what are the options for caregivers who want to ensure that their loved ones are covered financially? For me, bankruptcy was an extreme way to protect myself from manic spending. For others, it could mean taking advantage of workplace programs, applying to government disability assistance, or even working with your caregivers to find a balance that works for both.
We need to look at measures where things begin to get either in a collaborative fashion controlled from the outside. So I've worked with families where a family member says, I can dole money out for you, or I can take over paying your rent, but you have to ensure that you do this and this with me.
In the workplace, we need to do a better job at breaking down stigmas. We need to do a better job of educating our workers about what is mental health versus mental illness. And we need to do a better job at getting the information out there so when people need help, they know where to go and they will get help quickly.
Family members often take on a caregiving role. Not everyone has a family to turn to when they need help. Friends and community play a huge supporting role, especially for young people and those from marginalized and at-risk communities, who are 3 times more likely to suffer from mental health issues than the general population. Communities help lessen the feeling of being isolated or different from the people around you. But finding your community, both as a caregiver or someone living with mental illness, can be a challenge.
A problem in the mental health system that I've experienced, and pretty much everyone I know has experienced in some way, is just a lack of representation in staff. It all feeds into why we know women, racialized people, anyone that's marginalized isn't valued as an expert of their own health and their own body.
Like therapy, it can be hard knowing what you need. And so having these different community supports and different modes of healing offers people different ways of knowing what actually helps them in their healing journey.
Age, gender, cultural background, and sexual orientation can all make it harder to receive and give proper care. And not just within the healthcare system. Caregiving comes in different shapes and forms. Friends, community members, and even social media influencers can all play a part in someone's recovery.
I think that having support from the community helps a lot because you don't feel that it's all you. You have people to talk to. And I think that what's interesting about the young carer experience is that the young in particular, and there's that age gap. Like, do you talk to your uncle who is, 20, 30 years older than you, who came from a completely different generation, who may not be comfortable speaking about mental health struggles and so forth?
There's definitely a generational difference when it comes to managing mental health. Like when you look at Gen Z, millennials, we have social media, we have TV shows, But when you look at older generations, you know, people coming from like the civil rights era, people coming from people who migrate here from countries that have way less support, way less social support than what we have here, they had to grin and bear it for a lot of them for their entire lives.
For many younger people especially, the need for a caregiving community has pushed social media in search of people that understand who they are and what they're going through.
Je pense que quand tu fais partie de la communauté LGBTQ+, tu vas toujours faire face à de la discrimination de près ou de loin, mais être sur les réseaux sociaux, je trouve que personnellement, ça m'a aidé parce que j'ai pu trouver un sens de la communauté, tu sais, pouvoir relate avec des gens, recevoir des beaux commentaires de gens qui s'identifient à ce que je partageais.
I think that online communities can definitely be a place where we can provide care. It looks different, obviously, than if we're in person, but it can be a real strength.
One thing for me is that I'm 25 right now. I found out about young carers when I was 24. And it's only been a year since I was able to put a name to this experience. Imagine that the statistics show that there's 1.25 million young carers. Imagine how many people like myself are going through the same experience.
There's something empowering about talking to people who truly understand what you're going through. Throughout my own recovery, I've turned to friends, partners, and other people in my community for support in times of need. At times, this became my chosen family when I needed space for mine.
People in communities that have, you know, shared interests or shared life experiences with you have that context, just in a different way. That's what the idea of chosen family is.
C'est la réalité des gens queer, c'est pas tout le monde qui comprend. T'sais, les gens à l'extérieur de la communauté peuvent avoir de l'empathie pour ce que tu vis, mais ils vivront jamais sur une base régulière. Fait que je pense que c'est des gens qui ont des expériences similaires à toi, tu sais.
As a caregiver, you can often feel overwhelmed and isolated from friends and family who don't truly understand what you're going through. But finding your chosen family can be a powerful way to build your own support network. Look for support groups in your community. Or if you're not ready to commit, finding your chosen family can be as simple as Googling what you're dealing with, or searching social media for influencers who share their own stories. There's always someone somewhere who understands what you're going through and could be ready and willing to talk.
The more we talk about it as a community, the less it's stigmatized, the more people are becoming more comfortable with actually seeking professional support and even just talking about their feelings with safe people.
If you don't want to share your experience, it's okay, and you're not less of a person for that. And I think if we have a culture where we're raising awareness for young carers, that in and of itself is so powerful. So you may have your experience, but you can put a name to it, you can understand it.
Millions of Canadians live with mental health issues, and there's a good chance you're close to one of them. Whether it's your husband, wife, partner, or even your best friend, it's hard to find a balance between loving and caring for someone with mental illness. So how can you build a healthy relationship that helps both you and the person you love get better?
You said separate the person from depression. Is there a way to bring it up?
Bring the fact that they're ill?
Well, bring the fact that it's not them. It's, you know, like I'm struggling with your depression. Like, is that a way to do it? Or are you just not even?
Well, I've had someone tell me very honestly, it hurt me so much. But I had someone say, I don't know if I want to deal with your illness for the rest of my life. And, you know, he was very clear. He was like, I want to be with you for the rest of my life, but I don't know if I want to deal with your illness for the rest of your life. And sadly, we can't separate them. Since my diagnosis, mental health has often become the elephant in the room for my relationships. Depression makes it hard enough to get out of bed, let alone want to go on a date. And then the energy and questionable decisions made during episodes of mania have put similar strain on my relationships. I've often wondered what a successful long-term relationship with someone suffering from mental illness could look like.
Dès le départ, la situation spéciale, c'est que je savais qu'elle vivait avec un trouble bipolaire, mais pour moi, dès ce moment-là, puis c'était clair pour moi, puis c'est encore aujourd'hui, je vis pas avec un bipolaire. Je vis avec une personne qui, entre autres choses, a un trouble bipolaire, mais elle a une personnalité, elle a des attributs, elle a des traits de caractère. Et c'est ça que j'avais vu à cette fameuse rencontre d'information-là.
Jean-Rémy Provost and Annie Baudin have been married for 25 years. They also work together at Relief, a Montreal-based organization that gives mental health workshops and training to both organizations and individuals. Over their decades-long relationship, they've learned the delicate balance of caregiving and loving.
Le moment le plus difficile pour un proche, c'est quand tu ressens le sentiment d'impuissance. J'aurais bien voulu, moi, à un moment donné, prendre sa dépression. On peut pas. Fait que ça, c'est le pire sentiment qu'on peut pas avoir. Mais on a toujours eu, même dans les moments où elle allait vraiment pas bien, une bonne communication. Ça veut dire aussi que dans certains moments, qu'elle me dise « je veux pas parler », j'avais compris qu'il fallait juste être à côté d'elle, puis de dire « s'il y a quoi que ce soit, je suis là ».
Je crois que ce qui nous a aidés, c'était de les planifier quand j'allais bien. Et c'est cette confiance-là, rapidement, mutuelle, et qui ont permis que quand ça n'allait pas bien ou quand ces moments-là auraient pu arriver, mais Jean-Rémy avait les coups des franches pour pouvoir m'accompagner.
C'est important ce qu'Annie vient de dire parce qu'elle a tout le temps eu le souci de dire « oui, mais toi, as-tu un moment pour toi? » Puis tu sais, c'est ce qu'on dit à relief aux proches, c'est « garde-toi un moment parce qu'il n'y a rien de pire pour un proche d'être à côté de quelqu'un qui va vraiment pas bien. » Puis les statistiques le disent, il y a beaucoup de dépression parmi les proches.
For most adults, your partner becomes your primary caregiver and support system in your life. But for many people suffering from mental health issues, there's not always an option. For me, friends became my social safety net, especially during episodes of depression.
She explained to me what her manic episodes look like and what her depressive episodes look like. So I felt prepared. I felt like I was, okay, I know this is what's happening. And I would just keep reaching out and just keep messaging her. And I learned to not take it personal if she wouldn't show up or she would cancel at the last second.
At the beginning, not really knowing how to handle the first depressions, I would be maybe much more aggressive and demanding. Like, come on, it's time to go out. Like, let's go, put on your clothes. We're going for a walk.
My friends became a lifeline, dragging me out dancing or inviting me to a quiet dinner, even when everything in my head was screaming for me to stay inside. But like other relationships, finding that balance in a friendship can be difficult.
To be a helpful friend, I think you have to be able to create a space where you can both be vulnerable. She was really upfront about her mental illness, and she was really clear, like, this is my checklist, this is what to look for. And, you know, if you find yourself overwhelmed, reach out to my family, reach out to my mom. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what I did. So it's almost like you have a support group for the support group.
It's the nature of friendship. It's we care for each other, so we give care to one another.
Mental illness doesn't have to define who you are or whether you can have a successful relationship, because any relationship takes work, understanding, empathy, and love, whether you're dealing with mental illness or not.
Je pense que la pire chose, c'est les préjugés. C'est les préjugés envers les personnes qui vivent un trouble de santé mentale, les préjugés envers sa propre vie, donc de communiquer, de vraiment se parler, de pas faire de cachette, c'est la clé pour moi.
There's no greater fear for caregivers than thinking that their loved one will take their own life. Yet, while suicide and suicidal thoughts are a reality for many people suffering from mental health issues, talking about suicide is still treated as taboo. But ignoring suicidal thoughts won't make them disappear.
So how can caregivers and their loved ones broach this very complex topic and learn to talk about dark thoughts in a safe and meaningful way?
When it comes to caregivers talking about suicide, I think this is probably very delicate and a very fearful topic. It might have a lot to do with how was the person's entry into their mental illness. Did they start with a suicide attempt? Or did their depression eventually lead them to that?
Suicidal thoughts come at different times for different people. For me, the dark thoughts started slowly during episodes of depression, but then quickly began to take over my mind.
La différence entre pensée suicidaire et geste suicidaire, c'est une mince ligne, mais je crois personnellement, à mon expérience, que quand tu as la pensée, tu es encore prêt à en parler, puis à vouloir ouvrir le dialogue. Quand tu as décidé que ça se passe, puis t'en parles pas, puis t'avertis pas personne.
Marco is a close friend and a suicide survivor. He's always been one of the few people who I can openly speak with about suicidal thoughts. Because for caregivers, it can be hard to understand that suicidal thoughts don't always mean that someone will act on them.
So Joëlle, she told me that she wanted to kill herself.
I remember my mom calling me, telling me I had to head to her apartment as quickly as possible because she was suicidal and she had these really dark thoughts. So that's what I did. I got in my car and went to her place. And I got to the 19th floor and I knocked on her door and she wasn't answering. And that was very scary. You just feel powerless when that kind of thing happens. You don't know what to do. You just feel so powerless.
Moi, j'ai découvert que j'étais bipolaire parce que je me suis rendu à l'hôpital sur une civière, presque en fait mort quand je suis arrivé à l'hôpital. Aussitôt que je me suis réveillé, c'était un peu plus un épisode psychotique que j'avais. Je voulais pas manger parce que je voyais les araignées dans ma soupe. À un moment donné, ma mère part puis elle nomme la date ou la journée de la semaine. Puis là, je fais comme... Je réalise que ça fait une semaine que je suis dans le coma. 6 mois après ma première tentative de suicide, j'en ai fait une deuxième. Je voulais être sûr que cette fois-là, j'allais pas me réveiller. Se suicider, c'est complexe. On essaie de mettre tout le temps les choses qu'on peut en ordre. J'ai fait le ménage avant, j'ai placé les choses. J'ai aussi fait un geste qui est en fait, aujourd'hui que je trouve problématique parce que ça allait laisser des séquelles. J'avais texté à ma mère et à ma sœur que je les aimais. Puis à partir de ce moment-là, ben ce mot-là, en fait, est devenu problématique parce que à chaque fois, c'était comme « Oh mon Dieu, est-ce que c'est la crise? Est-ce que ça arrive encore? Qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire? »
The honest truth is, while caregivers might think that hospitalization is the only way to keep their loved ones safe, the message that comes across for patients can feel like we're not allowed to talk about how we feel.
What we would like to have is to feel that somebody who is having suicidal thoughts can share it, and that the other person can listen and can say, is there anything I can do? And if there's nothing that they can do, can they at least accompany the person?
If you're dealing with a loved one who is talking about suicide or feeling suicidal or having these thoughts, I really think it's important to receive that instead of saying, no, don't do that, no, don't think that. It's important as a caregiver to be open to hearing these difficult things.
At other times, we want to engage in, do you need a safety plan? Do you need something where if it really becomes too much of you, here's what you're going to do. And it could be, here's who I'm going to call, or here's where I'm going to go, or I'm not going to be by myself tonight, or I'm going to make sure that I don't drink.
These are hard conversations to have. Being open about self-harm and dark feelings is something no caregiver wants to deal with. But silence is worse than any words that might be said. Today, I'm able to sit with my family and talk about suicide, but it took us years to get to that level of understanding, empathy, and trust. Not everyone has that kind of time.
I remember we were out for a walk once and I knew you were having these dark thoughts and you said, like, oh yeah, I want to die, like, all the time, all day. Yeah. I just want to die.
Especially when I found out I had bipolar disorder, it was like, this isn't just once. Like, this is going to be forever. There's no cure, and we're all stuck in this forever. And it's rock and roll. Like, it's high and it's low and it's intense and unpredictable.
Yeah. We would all rather be stuck in this forever than to not have you around. I'm okay with being stuck in this forever.
Know that no matter how you're feeling, there's someone somewhere that you can talk to. Whether it's a friend, family member, caregiver, volunteer at a suicide hotline, you're not alone. Please reach out if you feel you need help and support. Over the past 7 years, my family, but especially my parents, have been my primary caregivers. They've been with me in hospital rooms and doctor's offices. They've been in my home, helping me cook and clean and buy groceries. But they won't always be there. As a caregiver, you can feel overwhelmed by what you feel is needed of you today. But what's even more important is how you can help create a tomorrow that's healthier and better for everyone.
I haven't thought about that very much.
About what?
About the future. About the far future. because there's too much to deal in the present.
It's not uncommon for a caregiver of someone with mental illness to ignore the future. In my own life, it took years to get to a place where I wasn't afraid of what might happen in the next few weeks or months. But eventually, through work, support, therapy, and medication, I'm in a place where the fog has lifted and I can finally see a future. When I saw the river creek, I was overcome by sadness for all the times I'd been to it last year and was too depressed to enjoy it. Coming here, I thought I'd be scared to be alone in the forest, but instead I felt strong and independent.
Later on, I think if they're continuing to have a caregiver role with the person, there's that whole transitioning to what do we do? What is our role? You know, in other domains of medicine, this is more easily worked out. If you have surgery and they come home, they'll say, you know, check their temperature, look at their wounds, but it doesn't work the same way when we're dealing with mental health issues.
Most caregivers want their loved one to grow, to become independent and take ownership over their life. But coming to terms with the long-term impact of mental health can be really difficult.
I think that another thing that families are going through without necessarily recognizing it is grief. I think that when families recognize that this may be a long-term situation that may have ups and downs and so on and so forth, they have to come to terms with it.
But yes, there's that transition of finally being able to sort of go, we have to back away a little bit so that we can have some of our life back as well. And oftentimes that's a tough one where, again, we can try and work with caregivers to support them in saying, there is a boundary and don't feel guilty that you want a life. That's an appropriate thing for you to want to do.
I think that this is really very important, and this is part of the work that we are doing with caregivers, to recognize that, you know, they have a role, but they also have to know how to retreat and how to help their loved ones to stand on their own feet and do what they can do on their own.
It's an important part of recovery to stop doing so much as caregivers. Let these people live. Let the person suffering with mental illness figure it out. They will figure it out.
Planning for the future can feel impossible when you're drowning in the responsibilities of today. But one of the best things my caregivers and I did together was create a crisis plan, a list of steps and resources we put together during a period of good health.
Oftentimes, the dialogue around a crisis plan can help people see what resources are there. The internal resources are, can you self-soothe? Can you reground yourself? And the external resources are, who can I call? Do you have a crisis center's number? Do you have a friend's number? Do you have a backup friend's number?
I think that it's important for patients to plan for the future, to believe in the future, to have hopes for the future. I think mental illness is not a death sentence.
Talking to doctors, therapists, families, and their loved ones, it became clear that caregivers need 4 things to successfully plan for the future. First, they need to feel confident that they can step away and give their loved one independence to live their own life. Then, they need a crisis plan to help them feel that their loved one can cope with what life throws at them. Next, they need to know that the person can be financially secure, that they will have work or government support or some other way of paying their bills. And finally, they need hope. Hope that while things may get rocky again in the future, life can always be a little better.
And you are in the thick of mental illness, you very often lose hope. I think that it's critical that the families will carry the hope for you. And this is why they have to seek help, because if they can't carry the hope, we will carry the hope for them. So they will be able to carry the hope for their loved ones. Sometimes it sounds a bit, cliche and a bit of a slogan, without hope, there's no hope.